All right, let's dive into the fascinating realm of validation. In this deep dive, we're exploring how this skill can empower us not just in therapy, but in everyday life. Our sources today offer this really intriguing mix of personal stories and research, plus some practical tips too.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm particularly drawn to this story about a cardiac surgeon. She's having a tough time connecting with her daughter, and there's this tech company's experiment using validation in their work environment. It sounds groundbreaking.
Mm.
And get this, a filmmaker learned about simply showing up from, wait for it, an octopus.
Wow.
I can't wait to unpack all these stories and more.
Well, I think we should start by, really defining validation. A lot of folks, they kind of misunderstand it. I think it's like agreeing with someone or showering them with compliments, but it's not quite that.
Right.
It's more about truly understanding and accepting another person's experience,
Mhm.
whether it's emotional or, their thoughts or even their behaviors. It's about acknowledging their truth, even if you don't personally see things the same way.
So, like when a parent tries to comfort their upset son who's saying he hates his new baby sister,
Oh, yeah.
and the parent says something like, no, no, you don't hate her, you'll love playing with her when she's older. They're trying to solve the problem, but they're missing the mark on validating the child's very real feelings of, well, jealousy in that moment.
Exactly. That child needs to feel heard, needs to feel understood.
Right.
Validating those feelings, even if they seem, a bit exaggerated or irrational, it's crucial. It really is.
Hmm. I'm starting to grasp how impactful this can be. So, validation's more than just a feel-good thing in the moment. It has lasting effects.
Oh, absolutely. Research has actually shown that validation has remarkable benefits.
Really?
Improves relationships, reduces conflict, increases your influence, can even lead to behavior change.
Wow.
Some studies even suggest it's helpful in addressing addiction.
You're saying validating someone can actually motivate them to change? That's powerful.
It makes sense when you think about it. When someone feels truly understood, they're more open to hearing what you have to say. They're less defensive, more receptive to feedback.
Hmm.
It creates this pathway for growth.
It's such a shift from the traditional approach of lecturing or punishing people to force to change.
It really is. And the truly fascinating part is that validation goes beyond just our interactions with others. It also impacts our relationship with ourselves.
Oh, right. You mentioned self-compassion earlier. How does validating others strengthen that for ourselves?
Think of it like exercising a muscle.
Okay.
By practicing validation with others, we actually build up our validation muscle, so to speak. And that, in turn, empowers us to validate our own experiences and emotions.
Hmm.
It's this wonderful cycle that leads to greater self-acceptance and emotional well-being.
Right. Now you've piqued my curiosity. How do we actually hone our validation skills? Is there a method or a technique we can learn?
There is. Dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, offers this really helpful model called the validation ladder, and it breaks down validation skills into three distinct levels: mindfulness, understanding, and empathy.
Intriguing. Can you break down those levels? What makes each one unique?
Think of each level as a step towards deeper connection. So, mindfulness skills, those are kind of the foundation, accessible but subtle.
Hmm.
Understanding skills delve deeper, requiring greater engagement.
Okay.
And then empathy skills. These are the most impactful, but also the most challenging because they involve genuine emotional connection and vulnerability.
I like the image of climbing this ladder to achieve validation mastery.
Haha.
Could you give us some real-world examples? Like, what do these levels look like in practice?
Sure. Let's start with mindfulness skills. The focus here is on being fully present with the other person. The first skill is attending, which involves those nonverbal cues, like making eye contact, nodding, being physically present during a conversation. While they seem small, they can communicate so much.
Oh, I have a confession. I had this epic fail at attending recently. I was chatting with a nanny at the park, and she was telling me about her stressful day. And I was completely zoned out, mentally planning my grocery list. It was mortifying when I realized it.
Oh, we've all been there. The key is to recover gracefully. If you find yourself drifting off, acknowledge it honestly. You could say something like, "I apologize, my mind wandered for a second. Could you repeat that?"
Own the slip-up. What's the other mindfulness skill?
A copying. This involves subtly mirroring the other person's words, tone, maybe even their mannerisms, to kind of create this sense of resonance and connection.
Oh, I actually experimented with copying with my husband the other night.
Really?
He was recounting this hilarious story
Hmm.
about Seth Rogen having a wild, shroom-fueled grocery store adventure in Amsterdam.
Wait, Seth Rogen, shrooms in a grocery store? Do tell.
Oh, it's a classic Rogan tale. Anyway, I was trying to be subtle, but I was intentionally echoing some of his phrases and descriptions, like gorgeous park or instant connection.
So it sounds like you've grasped the essence of copying.
We think so.
The key, like I said, is subtlety. You're not trying to blatantly mimic.
Got it. It's amazing how these seemingly insignificant things can create such a powerful sense of connection. Now I'm ready to climb to the next run, understanding. What do those skills entail?
Well, understanding skills go beyond just paying attention.
Right.
They involve demonstrating that you actually comprehend the logic and motivations behind someone's reactions,
Hmm.
even if you don't personally agree with them.
Got it. What's the first understanding skill we should know about?
It's called contextualizing. This means viewing someone's behavior through the lens of their past experiences, potential misinformation they might hold, or even, mental health conditions.
Okay.
Basically recognizing that their reaction makes sense within that specific context, even if it might not be the most effective or appropriate way to respond.
That makes me think of a client I worked with, a physician. He was totally overwhelmed by emails in his demanding new job. Felt so burned out and blamed himself for not keeping up.
It's easy to fall into self-blame when we struggle,
Right.
but so often there are external factors at play.
It turned out his department had this totally unreasonable workload. It wasn't his personal failing at all. Once he recognized that, his feelings of hopelessness diminished.
That's a great example of how contextualizing can reframe a situation and reduce self-criticism. It's about grasping the why behind someone's response.
I like that. What's the other understanding skill?
It's called equalizing. This is the art of affirming that anyone in the same situation would likely react similarly. It's a very potent way to convey that their response is normal, that they're not, overreacting.
I do this a lot with my friends when they're going through a hard time. I might say something like, if I were in your shoes, I'd be heartbroken too.
Exactly.
It conveys your feelings are legitimate.
You can even take it a step further and acknowledge that they're handling things better than you might in their position.
Oh, nice. Adding that extra layer of support.
Exactly. In situations where someone is facing, unjust judgment or invalidation for a normal reaction, equalizing becomes even more critical.
That reminds me of the tragic story of Marie Adler.
Oh, yes.
She was a rape victim who was wrongly accused because of some inconsistencies in her account. And the investigators, they just didn't understand that trauma can lead to those kinds of variations in how someone recounts an event.
It's a heartbreaking example of what can happen when we fail to equalize someone's response. If those investigators had understood that her reactions were actually quite typical given the trauma, she might have been spared years of agony and injustice.
Such a powerful reminder that validation can have real-world consequences, even in the most serious circumstances. All right, now I'm really excited to tackle the final level of the validation ladder, empathy. What makes these skills so potent, and can you give us some examples of how they work?
Well, empathy skills require a bit more from us. We have to be more vulnerable, reveal more of ourselves in order to establish a deeper connection. They offer the most validation, but they also present the greatest challenge.
Challenge accepted. Let's hear about that first empathy skill. What is it?
It's called proposing, and this skill involves offering insightful observations about someone's unspoken thoughts or feelings based on what you know about them and the situation.
Okay, so it's kind of like playing detective, right? We gather clues from their words and actions and then gently present our interpretation. But how do we walk that fine line between offering insight and sounding presumptuous?
That's a great question. You can use phrases like, I'm sensing, or it seems like, to create a more collaborative and open tone. For instance, instead of saying, you must be overwhelmed right now, you could ask, are you perhaps feeling a bit overwhelmed with everything that's going on?
Softening it, inviting them to share without feeling put on the spot. That makes sense. What other empathy skills are there?
The next one is taking action, and this involves offering practical support when it's appropriate. It's moving beyond words and demonstrating care through tangible assistance.
That seems fairly straightforward, but I imagine it requires some careful consideration. How do we know when taking action is actually helpful and when it might overstep boundaries?
It really comes down to understanding the individual's needs and respecting their autonomy. So, for example, if someone is clearly struggling, but they seem capable of handling things on their own, Offering specific assistance can be incredibly validating, like bringing them a meal when they're swamped with work or picking up their children from school.
Acts of service could be so powerful.
They really can, but on the other hand, if someone prefers to manage things independently, taking over can actually feel disempowering. So always inquire before intervening and be prepared to step back if your assistance isn't welcome.
Respecting those boundaries is essential. What other empathy skills should we be aware of?
Well, there's emoting, which involves expressing our authentic emotions to demonstrate genuine connection with another person's experience.
So it goes beyond just comprehending their feelings. It's about showing them that we resonate with their experience.
Exactly. Think about Jon Stewart's incredibly moving testimony for the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. His words were impactful, of course, but it was his raw emotion, the tears, the trembling voice, that truly conveyed the depth of his empathy for the first responders.
His authentic emotion really transcended any carefully crafted argument. This raises an interesting question, though. What if we misjudge the emotional tone or express something that misses the mark?
It's certainly a risk we take when we choose to be vulnerable. We have to be mindful of how our emotions might be received. Expressing excitement when someone is grieving, for example, would create dissonance. The key is to be genuine, but also attuned to the other person's emotional state.
I see how mastering these skills could be challenging, but also so rewarding. Okay, what's that last empathy skill on the ladder? What have we got?
It's called disclosing, and this involves sharing our personal experiences to show that we understand what someone's going through.
I can see the power in that. But I can also see the potential for, oversharing. How do we strike a balance between vulnerability and maintaining appropriate boundaries?
The key is to focus on shared observations rather than the singularity of your own experience. The goal is to convey, I've encountered similar struggles and I understand how you might be feeling without, hijacking the conversation or making it about yourself.
So it's about finding common ground, showing that you understand, but not trying to one-up their experience.
Exactly. Boundary awareness is crucial here. When in doubt about whether disclosing is appropriate, start with a low-level revelation, something brief and impersonal, and gauge their response.
Test the waters before diving in. What if we do accidentally cross a boundary or shift the focus onto ourselves? How do we recover from that?
You can gently steer the conversation back to the other person. Employ those mindfulness skills we discussed earlier, like attending and copying, to show that you're refocusing on their experience.
A reset button to recenter the conversation on their needs. This deep dive has been incredible. I'm already thinking about how I can incorporate these skills. You mentioned self-validation earlier. Can you explain how that works and why it's important?
Self-validation is just as vital as validating others. It involves applying the same principles, mindfulness, understanding, empathy, to our own internal world. We all have that inner critic that can be pretty harsh.
Oh, tell me about it.
Self-validation is like the antidote to that inner critic.
I'm definitely eager to learn more about that. We've covered so much ground, though. I want to make sure our listeners are absorbing all this great information. Maybe we could shift gears into self-validation in our next segment.
I think that's a great idea. We can delve into the specifics of self-validation and explore some practical techniques for managing that inner critic in the next part.
Perfect. Stay tuned, everyone, as we journey deeper into the world of self-acceptance and discover strategies for silencing that inner critic. We'll be back soon.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's pick up where we left off and dive into the fascinating world of self-validation.
I'm ready to turn those validation superpowers inward. How do we begin?
It all starts with recognizing that all our emotions, every single experience, even the uncomfortable ones, they're all valid.
Okay.
We often try to resist or suppress those difficult emotions, but self-validation encourages us to embrace them, to see them as a natural part of the human experience.
This feels like a big shift from the typical advice to just, think positive or get over it.
It is a shift. Self-validation is about acknowledging the full spectrum of our emotions, not just the pleasant ones.
So how does the validation ladder apply to self-validation? Is it the same process as validating others?
It's a modified approach, for sure. Remember, self-validation is all about applying mindfulness, understanding, and empathy. But this time, we're directing it toward our own inner world.
Got it. Walk us through it. What details do we start with?
Mindfulness is key. It's the foundation. In this context, it means paying close attention to our physical sensations and emotions, and doing so without judgment. Body awareness and deep breathing techniques, those can be really helpful here. They can ground us in the present moment and create this space for acceptance.
Like hitting the pause button on all the mental chaos. What else is involved in self-validation?
Well, we can adapt several skills from the validation ladder, starting with attending and copying.
Right.
But this time, we're directing them inward.
So we become observers of our own internal dialogue, like we're reflecting those feelings back to ourselves.
Exactly. The key, just like with validating others, is to listen without judgment, notice your body's signals, notice the emotions that are surfacing, and acknowledge them without criticism.
Easier said than done sometimes. My inner critic loves to chime in with a whole lot of negativity.
Ah, yes, the infamous inner critic. That's where the understanding skills, contextualizing and equalizing, those can be super helpful.
Because they can help us challenge those negative beliefs.
Okay. Can you give us some examples? How do we apply those skills to our own emotions?
Sure, imagine you're feeling disappointed in yourself. Maybe you made a mistake at work, or said something you regret. Instead of berating yourself, try asking, given my circumstances, does my reaction make sense?
That's a powerful question. It shifts the focus away from self-blame.
Exactly. It allows for a more objective perspective. And then you can apply equalizing. Ask yourself, would anyone else in this situation feel similarly? Most likely the answer is yes. And that helps normalize your experience and reduces those feelings of isolation.
That reminds me of when I was writing my book. It was during chemotherapy.
Oh, wow.
And the emotional side effects were really intense. I remember grappling with feelings of depersonalization and even, this is so weird, a sudden aversion to kittens.
That sounds incredibly challenging. It was, and I honestly believe that if I hadn't been familiar with self-validation, I would have spiraled, into self-doubt and anxiety. But recognizing that my reactions were, well, understandable given what I was going through, that allowed me to navigate those challenges with a sense of self-compassion.
A true testament to the power of self-validation. It really does help us weather those emotional storms with more resilience and understanding.
Now, what about this empathy skills? Do those come into play with self-validation as well?
Well, we can't exactly propose insights to ourselves since we already possess those thoughts. We can definitely utilize taking action and disclosing to foster self-compassion.
This is where my brain starts to bend a little. How do we take action for ourselves?
Think of it as self-care. Ask yourself, what actions would support me during times of struggle? Maybe it's taking a break, engaging in a soothing activity, reaching out to a supportive friend.
It's about recognizing our needs and meeting them with kindness and compassion.
Exactly. Just as we would with validating others, ask yourself, what would I do for a loved one in this situation? And then extend that same care to yourself.
I love that reframing. It shifts the focus from shoulds to genuine needs. What about disclosing? How does that work in the context of self-validation?
This one can be a bit more nuanced, but it involves acknowledging those parts of ourselves that we might be ashamed of or hiding. Bringing those shadow selves into the light of awareness and accepting them as part of our wholeness.
That sounds liberating, but also a little frightening.
It can be both. The goal isn't to dwell in negativity, but to accept those parts with compassion, to affirm, even with these imperfections, I am worthy of love and acceptance.
That's a powerful message that I think a lot of us need to hear. What about those moments when emotions just feel completely overwhelming and validation seems impossible?
That's where the practice of radical acceptance comes in. It's about acknowledging that sometimes life is just hard. And that's okay. It doesn't mean we have to enjoy it or give up. It's about accepting reality as it is.
Surrendering to the present moment, even when it's painful.
Exactly. And it can be an incredibly freeing practice, especially when we're feeling trapped in that emotional turmoil.
This whole exploration of self-validation has been so insightful. I feel so much more equipped to handle those internal struggles with kindness and understanding. I'm curious, though, how does all of this, validating ourselves and others, translate into specific areas of life, like parenting, romantic relationships, even the workplace? Could we dive into those areas next?
Absolutely. Let's explore how these validation principles can transform our interactions in those really crucial domains.
Welcome back for our final exploration of validation. I'm excited to discover how these incredible skills can be applied to specific areas of life. Like, let's start with parenting. It's such a crucial area.
It really is. Parenting offers this amazing opportunity to utilize validation, to shape behavior and nurture emotional intelligence in our children. It's about finding that delicate balance between setting boundaries, reinforcing those positive actions, and also providing understanding and empathy.
So it's not about letting kids just run wild, but it is about responding to their emotional needs while we're guiding them to make those responsible choices.
Exactly. Think of validation as like a secret weapon in your parenting arsenal. It enables us to truly connect with our children on a deeper level, fosters trust and mutual respect.
I love that analogy. Secret weapon. I'll admit, though, my secret weapon sometimes misfires, especially when my daughter's having a meltdown, like throws a full-blown tantrum or just refuses to cooperate. Any tips for handling those kind of volatile situations?
Well, it's essential to remember that even in the midst of conflict, a child's emotions are valid, even if their behavior isn't acceptable. So instead of dismissing their feelings or resorting to punishment, focus on validating their emotions, while also providing clear feedback about their actions.
So, for example, I could say, I see you're frustrated because you can't have another cookie, but yelling at me is not okay. We could talk about this more when you're calmer.
That's a perfect example. You acknowledged her frustration while setting a clear boundary. And then afterwards, once things have calmed down, it's helpful to debrief with your child. Talk about what happened, how each of you felt, and maybe brainstorm some alternative ways to handle similar situations in the future.
That reminds me of that Gottman-Rappaport intervention technique we talked about before, where couples are encouraged to really listen and summarize each other's perspectives during those disagreements. Could that work for parent-child conflicts too?
Absolutely. Encourage your child to express their viewpoint without interruption. You could even suggest they draw a picture or write in a journal about what happened and how they felt. That can help them process those emotions and feel heard.
Such a great idea, turning conflict resolution into this creative and validating experience. Okay, let's shift gears to romantic relationships. How does validation contribute to those stronger, more fulfilling partnerships?
Well, intimacy thrives when it's nurtured by validation. When partners feel truly seen and accepted, they're more likely to be open and vulnerable, to share those deeper parts of themselves, and to face challenges as a team. It's about creating that safe haven for emotional expression and responding with empathy even when, disagreements inevitably arise.
It makes sense. How do we avoid that pitfall of, trying to fix our partner's problems? Or offering unsolicited advice when what they really need is just to be heard?
This is where those mindfulness skills we discussed, attending and copying, those become really vital. Remember, they're all about being present and engaged in the conversation, so focus on listening without judgment, reflecting their feelings back to them, and asking clarifying questions to make sure you're truly understanding their perspective.
Right. Be a supportive listener, not a problem solver. What about when conflicts do arise? How can we use validation to navigate those disagreements constructively?
The key here is to remember that validation doesn't equal agreement. You can validate your partner's feelings without necessarily endorsing their actions or opinions. It's about recognizing the legitimacy of their viewpoint, even if you don't share it.
So it's like saying, I understand why this is upsetting you and I hear your concerns, even if you don't agree with their stance.
Exactly. And just like with parenting, it's essential to debrief after those conflicts. Take some time to process what happened, offer apologies for any hurtful words that were exchanged, and explore ways to communicate more effectively in the future.
This advice feels so applicable to any relationship, really. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about the workplace. How can validation principles be used to create a more positive, more productive work environment?
Validation is crucial for fostering psychological safety and inclusion in any workplace. When employees feel valued and respected, they're much more likely to, share their ideas, take risks, and contribute their best work. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels heard and understood, regardless of their position or background.
That makes me think of that Google team building exercise we discussed, where employees were encouraged to share these personal stories about challenges they'd face. It seems like that was designed to cultivate that sense of shared vulnerability and empathy.
It was, and it was a brilliant approach because by fostering a deeper level of human connection, the team was able to dismantle those barriers and build a much stronger foundation of trust and understanding.
This has been such an incredible deep dive into validation. I'm leaving with a toolkit full of practical skills and a whole new appreciation for the power of understanding and empathy.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. Remember, validation is an ongoing practice, not a destination. Start by incorporating these skills into your daily life, even in small ways, and see what positive changes unfold.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, let's recap those 10 key takeaways for our listeners.
Great idea.
Number 1, validation is about communicating understanding and acceptance, not necessarily agreeing. Number 2, validation has been proven to have all these amazing benefits for relationships, conflict resolution, influence, behavior change, even self-compassion. Number 3, the validation ladder provides a fantastic framework for understanding and practicing these skills. Number 4, mindfulness skills like attending and copying. Those are the foundation. They help us truly see and hear others. Number 5, understanding skills like contextualizing and equalizing help us grasp the logic and reasons behind someone's reactions. Number 6, empathy skills. Things like proposing, taking action, emoting, and disclosing. These require us to take risks and reveal more of ourselves to create those deeper connections. Number 7, self-validation is a powerful tool for cultivating self-compassion and quieting that inner critic. Number 8, validation is essential for creating a psychologically safe and inclusive workplace. Number 9, remember, everyone wants to feel validated. Keep that in mind as you approach those difficult conversations. Number 10, even those small attempts at validation can make a huge difference. They can strengthen relationships and improve communication. So there you have it. 10 key takeaways to help you on your validation journey. And remember, validation is a gift we can offer to others and, just as importantly, to ourselves. Start practicing today and experience the transformative power it can bring to your life.